Hi, this is Brian Bieron with Platform Economy Insights and a briefing today on the Epic Games versus Apple antitrust suit. This is a really interesting one, in part because it involves such two big heavy hitters. Well, Apple's certainly one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Epic Games is famous because they're the game developer for Fortnite, which is a really revolutionary and meaningful player in the game space. In fact, it's been described as more than a video game. It's really a new kind of digital platform with all kinds of activity and conduct going on. It's especially gotten a boost in terms of usage and importance during the pandemic and the lockdown and all the rest. So what's up with Epic Games and Apple? A little background. I guess it's important to first understand how Apple pays for their app store and the whole mobile operating system that they've been one of the real revolutionary drivers behind. As we know, the smartphone was really kind of created in part by the Apple iPhone and apps. Of course, it's much bigger than Apple now, and in fact, Google with their Android system actually has more smartphones out there in the world. Apple and Google, their operating systems operate in very different ways, but in terms of this lawsuit, it's important to understand how Apple operates. First of all, Apple pays for basically their operating system, according to them, by charging app developers, app providers, when those app providers get paid for digital content. If you apparently offer an app for sale or even for free on the Apple system, and you don't charge people money, then Apple doesn't charge the developer. And in fact, most apps don't involve ongoing payments. But when an app does have payments, then Apple charges a 30% fee, and that fee is collected because Apple requires the app developer to use Apple Payments. So basically, as the money moves through Apple Payments, Apple takes a 30% cut. Fortnite's revenue is generated when users buy what's called micropayments. They engage in micropayments. They buy things in the game, little bits of money. It all adds up for Epic. And in fact, Apple takes, when it's done on Apple's system through the Apple app, Apple takes a 30% cut. Epic clearly has been upset about this system for quite a while. And back in the summer, in early August, they developed a version of the app, of the Fortnite app, that used their own payment system. In other words, they went around the Apple payment system. This does not just violate Apple's App Store rules, it also cuts Apple out of the revenue. So, Epic prepared that change in their app, and they also prepared a corresponding legal case and PR campaign because they knew what would happen. Now, I'm not just saying this. The judge in this case has made the very same claim. In fact, it's quite obvious. Basically, the order of events was Epic uploaded their new app, avoiding Apple payments and violating the App Store rules. Apple kicked Fortnite off the App Store. Epic sued Apple, filing a federal antitrust lawsuit. Actually, at the same time, Epic did the same thing aimed at Google, an app-based business model that's different than Apple's, not as restrictive, but still, Epic sued Google as well. But for the purposes of our briefing today, Epic sued Apple. Apple didn't just kick Fortnite off the App Store. Apple kicked something called the Unreal Gaming Engine, a service that Epic provides game developers to develop games, threatened to kick that off the App Store too, which would have hurt a lot of game developers. Epic filed court papers to get an injunction blocking Apple from kicking off Fortnite and kicking off the Unreal Engine. And back in late August, a federal judge in the Northern District of California essentially said Apple could ban Fortnite as an app, but could not ban the game engine, the game developing engine, because that would hurt a lot of game developers who had no part in this fight. And so the judge also said she would hold a hearing in person, and that hearing happened yesterday. So the reports out of the hearing is that the judge really grilled the Epic lawyers and didn't pull any punches. In short, the judge basically said to Epic, if you want your Fortnite game back in the App Store, you have a simple solution. Go back to following the App Store rules. Put back in the Apple payment system and then fight it out in court. Epic shockingly said, well, they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to have to pay those 30% fees. And they said that their users liked paying lower fees. The judge basically said, well, that's not surprising, but this is the way Apple's always funded their App Store and their iPhone business in part. And it's really not necessarily up to the courts to tell Apple they can't operate that way. And if that decision is going to be made, it can be made in a trial. And the judge said, be prepared to go to court next summer. Now, the other thing that I think is worth noting, and in part applauding because it seems like the judge had some understanding of what was going on in this case, the judge noted that the mobile gaming market might be one of the worst ones to use to challenge how Apple operates their App Store and the fees they charge. And that's because the judge noted that it isn't just Apple that operates a platform like this. She noted that, first of all, in the gaming world, there are multiple platforms that are at least as big as Apple's, and in fact, in many cases, are bigger. And she noted the console providers in particular. You have Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft with the Xbox. Each of those consoles operates a similar, quote, walled garden in the sense that they control which apps, which games can be played on the console. You have to purchase them in ways that the console provider says. And interestingly, each of them charges a similar fee to game developers for in-app purchases. Apparently, they all have 30% fee structures just like Apple. It's also worth noting that Apple's not the only even mobile platform, not the only mobile system. I mentioned Google earlier, and that's really relevant to this because Google's Android system, first of all, is at least as big, and it really depends on how you measure it, but it's certainly similarly large as the Apple iPhone, the iOS system. Also, Google, through its Play Store, its version of the App Store, actually tries to monetize in a very similar way as Apple. And in fact, Google is tightening its payments system for digital downloads in apps that are downloaded through its Play Store to monetize in a very similar way to Apple. So you have a bunch of big players in the gaming space and in the mobile space who are operating in a similar way. None of them are overly large in terms of market share compared to the others. And the judge pointed out that this makes it a really tough case, and that actually gaming might not be the market to look at if you really want to look at potential abuses by Apple. So they're going to be going to court. It's very unlikely, based on reports of what the judge was saying in the hearing, that the judge is going to change her initial ruling on injunctions. Fortnite, if it doesn't get changed back to a compliant version, is likely to stay off the Apple App Store. Users can use all the other different ways to play Fortnite. At the same time, Epic's game developing engine is likely to stay on the App Store. It does seem that the judge believes that kicking the Epic game developing engine off the App Store is really punitive and, again, will harm game developers who've got no dog in this fight. And lastly, the questions that are being raised by this are the kinds of things that we really need to be thinking about in terms of whether government is going to be drastically changing how it looks at competition law in the context of these large platforms. What we're really seeing here is whether or not you're going to have government and the courts looking at these large platforms as big entities competing with each other, and we're going to be using traditional market analysis in terms of what kind of market shares they have in these different markets, or they're going to be seen as really markets on their own. And that's really what Epic is asking for. The judge was basically saying Apple is only a relatively small share of the gaming market and even the mobile gaming market because you have these different platforms. Epic was saying yes, but on the Apple system, within the iOS operating system, you have like 1 billion users globally, they claimed. And game developers need to be able to sell to those 1 billion people through Apple. And Apple unfairly uses that leverage that they have. The Europeans are increasingly calling it Apple as a gatekeeper and these platforms as gatekeepers. So Epic was arguing Apple should be looked at as a monopolist, as a dominant platform on its own system. And that whether Android is out there, or whether Sony and its PlayStation is out there, or Microsoft and its Xbox is out there, doesn't really matter, because this is just about Apple as the dominant player on the Apple system. Well, we're going to see how that goes. In Europe, it's not necessarily going to be a court case. This is going to be an issue in what is called the Digital Services Act that is going to be introduced almost certainly in the next few months, and is going to be a big matter in front of the European Parliament and the European Commission in the coming year and even further. So we've got the Digital Services Act, which is going to be looking at, in fact, what the Europeans call gatekeepers. We also are going to have this case at a minimum in the United States looking at this question, as well as the prospect that maybe Congress and next year's administration, whether it's the current administration or a new Biden administration, will certainly be looking at this issue in the US context next year. And of course, don't worry, regulators, competition authorities in Korea, Japan, Australia, and as I said, Europe and the United States are all looking at App Store policies, Apple and sometimes Apple and Google. So there'll be more than enough different government regulators looking at the topic as well. So with that, we're all going to keep following Epic Games versus Apple. I have a sense that probably we won't have any big news unless Epic backs down for a while, for maybe a few months. But until then, we'll be watching all these platform competition issues and reporting when there's something interesting to talk about. This is Brian Bieron with Platform Economy Insights. Bye-bye.